Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Quivr User Spotlight, where we want to interview users on the Quivr platform who are simply doing really cool stuff. As always in the series, we want to bring people with different backgrounds, different experiences, and who are more or less doing different functions within their firm, or in today's case, different firms, plural. Right, Will?
Yeah, exactly. I think this is going to be a fun one because we get a lot of questions about like how are people using this stuff, what's going on, behind the curtain. And I think this is a unique experience to really see that from a very like the person actually doing a lot of the work behind the curtain, but doing it in two different ways because it's for multiple advisors. I think this is going to be a really special one.
For sure, for sure. And obviously, we're biased. Today, we have Marie Lovett, owner, founder, director of all things at Maker City Paraplanner. And Marie, we're not just saying this because you're here, but you are without a doubt one of our favorite operations folks that come to office hours because you ask, well, one, you don't ask the same question 46 times. You ask the question, you get the answer, you ask good follow-ups, and then you go and act on it. And it's been really cool to watch you work with the two Quivr firms that you do work with, because the two guys they're both very different. They serve a different, different niche, a different clientele. They also think fundamentally very differently, yet you are thriving with both of them. So Marie, without further ado, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. That was quite the introduction. I appreciate that.
Well, we got to shower you with the flowers, right? No, I kid. But Marie, we got to start with who you are, where you come from, and ultimately how you got to the point where you're serving two advisors on the Quivr platform.
Yeah, so it's a long story. I'll try to keep it short. I have been in the finance industry since 2009, and which has been a very long time. I kind of stumbled into it. I started at Jackson National Life in Michigan. It's an insurance company. You've probably heard of it. I started in their customer service department, worked my way up through tax planning and annuity training. So all those living benefits that Jackson is well known for, I know them like the back of my hand, which has always kind of put me in a special, unique position. I was at one point an annuity specialist for a firm that I worked for. And when we moved from Michigan to Tennessee, I bounced around from a couple of different IRAs, and I didn't really as I was getting into the financial industry more, I did not really like the whole, we'll work with you if you give us $250,000. I wanted to work more with people who were around my age, so like mid-20s at the time. I was getting really into personal finance, really into financial planning, which is something that Jackson National Life did not do. So once I've kind of dipped my toes into that, I really wanted to focus in that area. So a few years back, I started working for a pretty well-known advisor in the XYPN network, and was really thriving working for the niche that I wanted to work for. I really felt a lot sense of accomplishment supporting people who I didn't really feel like were I didn't feel like financial planning was offered to them in a way that they could afford, where someone was giving them advice on more than just investments, and was really loving it. My youngest son, who's 2 now, was born 2 months early. I spent a little bit of time in the hospital. He was in the NICU for a little while, and when he came home, I also have an older son. There's 6 years difference, so he was 6 at the time with a newborn. I just wasn't really in the realm to continue working full time. Postpartum, all the lovely things that come with that, plus a baby from the NICU who is very colicky and still today does not sleep at night.
No.
I decided to take a step away from full-time work, which was a really scary decision for our family, as you can imagine. I know finance really well. Stepping away from a sense of guaranteed income in a way with W-2 employment was really scary. But I'd had this idea on my heart for a while, and about 2 or 3 months into being a stay-at-home mom, I realized that I needed to stay involved. I wanted to stay involved. I wanted to position myself really well to come back into the workforce, knowing how hard it is for women specifically to get back into the workforce after taking time off. And when I thought about what that looked like, I knew I didn't want to work full time for anyone else. I knew I had a unique set of skills that I could offer somebody, but the imposter syndrome was there. I didn't know if anyone would be like, yeah, sure, I need a paraplanner. And I didn't know if anyone would want to pay the rate that I wanted to charge in order to make the time worth it. So that's kind of how Maker City Paraplanning came about. Is the name comes from Maker City, which was Knoxville, where I used to live, is known as the Maker City, as they have a lot of entrepreneurship support, especially for women. I've since moved back to Michigan, but the name is not changing. And, I really attribute the success of my firm to LinkedIn and an initial post that I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. If you know of anyone who's interested in contract 1099 paraplanning work, send them my way. And it still blows my mind that within the first 2-3 weeks, I had to turn off my Calendly prospect meeting link because I was inundated and processing these prospect phone calls and trying to figure out who I wanted to work for. I have a very unique advantage to where I have a color-coded system, red, yellow, and green, and I knew pretty quick the red advisors I did not want to work with. The yellow advisors I could work with if I had to, and then the green advisors were top of the list of I would love to work with these guys. Unfortunately, I say guys because I did not have a single woman prospect phone call, which still kind of bums me out. But I had the unique advantage to be super picky because I had such great response to my initial post. So that's ultimately where I am now, is just working for 2 advisors who have taken up all of my capacity and want more of my capacity. So I'm currently at capacity for the foreseeable future, but yeah. So that's how I got
Well,
where I am now.
Well, the irony in what you said, you were surprised it took you 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not surprised, Will. I'm not gonna speak for you, I guess, but you're probably not surprised, and we probably get asked from our Quivr user base once every couple of weeks, at least once or twice a month, "Do you know anybody that wants to do fractional paraplanning and fractional CSA work?" So the need is insane. So if you ever I can tell you right now, if you ever wanna hire and have the company be more than just you, you'll fill that sucker up real quick. But I love how intentional you were, because you had experience with Jackson, which is on one end of the spectrum, all the way out to the advisor from XY who I'm familiar with, but we won't say their name just for privacy reasons, who is like on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, and they do real great actual planning work. In fact, I know another advisor who hires them as their advisor. So if you can do a good enough job to have your clientele include financial planners that do good planning, then you're doing something right. So you ultimately did pick 2 people. I would say it's probably a coincidence that they were both on Quivr. I doubt that that was one of your matrix that turned yellow, green, or red. But after you picked them and you started getting into the day to day, can you just kind of maybe pretty quickly, pretty high level, describe what role you serve for either both of them, one of them, or maybe in the aggregate?
I love this question because a lot of people at the XYPN conference this year, they're like, well, what does a paraplanner actually do? And I really can't answer that question. And I think a lot of people have a hard time answering that question. So this is how I came to phrase it. And I don't know if this makes much sense, but for me, what I do for the 2 advisors that I work for is I do whatever they want me to. And I think the reason I can do whatever they want me to, with limits, which I'll talk about, is because I have the experience and the knowledge and the tenure in this industry to know like best practices. And to your point, maybe I could hire some people and build a team. I've thought about that, but I have such high standards for myself that I don't even feel like I fit, that I don't know if I would be a really good boss for anyone else. But really, I do anything that they want me to. And I'll start with what I can't do. So I can't give investment advice because I'm not registered through these firms. I mean, I'm not registered as an RIA myself, so I cannot give investment advice. And I really stay away from any sort of direct advice to the client that does not come from the advisor. So it would say, Advisor A would say, will you please let John Doe know XYZ? But I tend to stay away from investment advice, no trading, and things like that. What I am doing is a lot of onboarding work, workflow creation, rollover paperwork. I am client facing more so for one advisor than the other. And by client facing, I am not attending any meetings, and that's a personal choice. So that was one thing that I explained to the advisors when I prospected with them, was that, hey, I'm not doing meetings just because my schedule is it's very consistent right now, but in the beginning I didn't think it would be. So by client facing, I mean I've had phone conversations with clients. I forgot. I did recently attend one meeting, which was a cash flow conversation with Monarch, with one of the advisor's clients, since Monarch is something that I use on my own side of my coaching work. So I have built up enough trust, which I think where conversation would go is that it really comes down to the trust that I've built with the advisors that allow them to say, I know Marie can handle communications with the clients. I know she can build workflows. If I ask her to research something, I know she knows what she's doing and what she's looking for to come back with some research that actually makes sense. Meeting preparation, tax projections, utilizing pay stubs, using Plan, Quivr, of course, figuring out how to best utilize Quivr. processing charitable contributions, using Altruist and Charles Schwab, opening accounts, moving money, things like
So
that.
I have a question for you on this. So most of our listeners know that my mom works with me on my planning firm, and even I mean Ashley, the operations support individual that most of our users are interacting with. If they submit a ticket and whatnot, both of them actually work isn't their number one priority. Which I hope you don't take this as a slight, but work doesn't sound like your number one priority either. It sounds like your two children are your number one priority, and you've built your work around that. And what I love is my mom was a stay-at-home mom for 25, 30 years. And Ashley, she has two young kids as well, and she wanted to take a step back professionally, and that's why she came to work with Quivr so that her kids could be her priority. And I love it because these people, like you, Ashley, my mother, if you guys can handle young kids, you can handle advisors, because advisors, we're just children. We basically are. We're children that have we get distracted so easily, and we need somebody just to slap us on the wrist every once in a while and tell us what we need to do, right? And it's cool. So, and where I'm going with this, I promise I have an end result here, is you're talking about a lot of process driven items. And when we see advisors, typically if you look at their kind of their what they enjoy doing versus what they don't enjoy doing, successful advisors tend to enjoy the sales process. They tend to enjoy the relationship management, but they tend to have a shortcoming when it comes to creating processes, defining processes, and then following through with those processes. So as you're talking about onboarding clients and handling, custodial paperwork and rollovers, these are very particular and very specific workflows, very specific processes. So are you helping them define those processes and then also implementing them, or are you simply just doing what they're telling you to do?
Great question. So, a little of both. One advisor that I'm supporting kind of had all of the workflows created. And I don't want to say too many workflows, but there is such a thing as too many workflows. One advisor had a lot of workflows already created, the other one didn't. So, because they're so similar, we actually would take advisor one's workflow, copy it over to advisors two, and kind of manipulate it and see how it fits in that person's practice. I will say, coming into this, I know enough about how business works to create a workflow, right? I know how to create a workflow for an onboarding process. I know certain steps that you'd want to include in an onboarding process. Same thing with account openings or transfers or 401k rollovers. However, what I learned, and this is something that has been really insightful for me, is that if an advisor doesn't know how they want their business to run, it's really hard for someone like me to come in and step in and create the workflow. So it's a very I say that if I were to tell anybody looking to hire a paraplanner or contract support, is that know how you want your business to run. There's so many different ways. There are some advisors that just do a data gathering form and you're off and running. There are some advisors that have a 3-step meeting process. There are some advisors that do it way, way different, right? And so you have to have a really good foundation for how you want your business to work for someone to come in and help you create the workflows. Otherwise, the workflows just kind of, this isn't working, it gets stalemated here, you abandon it there. So that is one thing that is very collaborative and it's very fluid. So if it's not working the way that we initially created, we pivot, right? So
Yeah.
we'll take a step out. We know that not every client is going to onboard exactly the same way, which those always throw your workflows for a loop, but it's very collaborative in that
No,
sense.
I love that you shared that because we see that. 100% we see that. We have advisors who maybe maybe the solo advisor, which the two advisors you support with were solos before they started working with you. They'll get on Quivr and they think that Quivr is just going to be the magic wand that is going to solve all of their operational processes and procedures. And is that going to be the case? Absolutely not. Now, Quivr can be the tool to help you implement that, but I can't sit with an advisor. Will can't sit with an advisor at office hours and tell them what they want their firm to look like. So I love that you just shared with that. And what we see is we try to push them higher, but you need to provide that guidance. If you can tell them where you are today and where you're trying to go, somebody like you is going to be an excellent resource to come in and define the steps necessary to accomplish that trajectory, right? And that's so different than a financial advisor. If advisors who are listening to this meet with a new client and that new client doesn't tell them anything about what they want their life to look like, how the heck are we going to do planning? I need to know where you're trying to go in order to help you get there. So it's the exact same thing, but the advisor who's owning their firm is the client, and the paraplanner, right, the Marie, you're the advisor trying to help them get there. And we see it all the time because they'll come back to us, or I have peers as well, and they'll make comments about how it's just not working with this part-time paraplanner, this part-time CSA. And it's like, well, what's not working? Well, they're not doing anything. I can't delegate anything to them. It's like, well, have you told them what you want delegated? Have you told them how you want it done? Have you told them what you want the end result to be? And I tell the story. I'm getting passionate. I know I'm talking fast, but I tell the story about my mom. When I hired her 4 years ago, she almost quit, and she was justified. She should have quit. I was a terrible boss because I did a crappy, I'd use a stronger word, but I'm not going to swear. I did a very bad job of explaining to her where I wanted to go. So I love that you shared that. So any solo advisor or small team who is struggling, where the advisor thinks that their staff is incompetent or inept and just can't figure it out, I would really challenge you to go read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and realize that it's most likely not their fault. It is most likely the advisor's fault. It is your fault for not telling them what you want to see done. Because once you effectively communicate that, as somebody like you, Marie, is going to be able to run with that and work magic inside of their systems. All right.
Yeah,
And
and
Rand,
I'll add to that if you don't mind. I'll take a couple of minutes to
I
add
love it.
something to it. So I've not read that book, but I will read that book. And I will say that there are, how do I say this? I'll preface this, but I did work for an advisor in the past who was very particular, rightfully so. They were a solo advisor, hired their first like actual W-2 employee. And like, I get it now that I'm a business owner, it's their baby. Solo advisors, when you're running this firm, this is your baby, this is your heart and soul. You sacrifice so much into this business that when you hire somebody, whether it's contract support or a W-2 employee, you are releasing control of a little bit. And it is probably very scary, hence why I won't do it in my own business. But there was a lot of critique and a lot of feedback. And ironically, you started off this conversation, words of affirmation are my love language. And it was like, I got the opposite of that with so much constructive feedback that I felt like I wasn't doing anything right, which is where the imposter syndrome for starting my own firm came from, was that I never did a single thing right for this other advisor. What makes me think I can do anything right for other advisors? It was something I had to overcome myself and just be like, just do it, see what happens. And what I would say is that if you are an advisor who has a very particular way of doing a very specific task, there's a very easy solution. And I'm going to say the pros and cons of it, or what I've heard are pros and cons of it, are create a Loom video or a Zoom clip video of you doing that specific task, start a library. And when you hire that person, you already have a library of how-to videos built in your system for how you prefer to do something. And so I will say that I have heard at XYPN this year when I went and I was explaining that to someone, they rebutted and said, well, that would take so much time. As with anything, right? As with getting onboarded with a system such as Quivr, think of everything in your life that you've ever done. It takes time, but the payoff later on down the road gives you back so much more time. So I will say that working with a paraplanner, a contract paraplanner, a W-2 employee, when you make that first hire or you hire that support, you actually have to give up a lot of your time that you probably don't have to help onboard them. And one way to save some of that time is to periodically be creating this library of educational how-to videos in advance of that day. And it's so easy just to kind of build it up and it's ready to go for when you hire someone. And then you assign them the task. Let's say in Quivr, a task gets assigned to me. The link is in there and I'll watch the video once or twice. I can outline the steps in the workflow so I don't have to watch the video every time. And then boom, ready to go.
Yeah. So for our listeners who aren't on Quivr, what Maria is describing is inside of our workflow engine, you have the ability in a rich text field to document the steps required to complete that particular step within a workflow. And we have a masterclass in the community, which I know both of the advisors you work with and yourself are involved. You guys are in the community all the time and you're at office hours all the time. We teach you exactly what to do there. So this Loom video that Maria is referencing, you can record it and then you can embed it in there. So imagine when you kick off the workflow for onboarding an account and you want to talk about things being particular or transferring an account, I'm sorry. I am very particular that when an account gets transferred in, my mom looks at the prior statement that we use for the transfer and looks at Schwab and makes sure that every single share of every single position got moved over. So I have a Loom video in that specific step, embedded in that specific step, that tells her exactly what to do. I pull up Schwab, I pull up the statement, I go line item by line item, and it's a 10-minute video for her to look at it. That way I know that that step is getting done the exact way that I want it done. So when we talk about like what Marie is doing here, you build that library Well, training is easy because all you do is kick off a workflow, and that workflow should be documented well enough where you don't have to sit with that person. So yeah, maybe it takes you an extra hour to build the workflow, but you never have to do it again. So your return on time is insane.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think one of the other interesting things that you guys have sort of been circling around is like, there's such a desire for how are we supposed to be doing this stuff? I mean, like if you look at like Kitsis, XY, like there's so much, here's a client service calendar, here's here's all of these things that you might want to implement in your practice. And I think where that comes from is that as much communication as we have in a lot of these channels, people don't necessarily get to see exactly how other people are doing the work. And that can be such a powerful thing. I worked by myself for a long time. I worked at a large firm for, I guess, a couple of larger firms throughout my career. And it was really interesting to see like how, even though the work is often very similar, people do it in very different ways. And objectively, there are good ways to do things and some not as good ways to do things. And when you're at a firm, sometimes it's really hard to question, like, why are we doing it this way? Like, I don't know if you guys have ever worked at a firm where you go to someone, you're like, I don't understand. Like, why is it this way? And it's because that's how I got trained that it was done. And that's how the person trained them that it was done. And we just kind of kept pushing this forward, even though sometimes this stuff changes. And so I think that, you're sort of in a unique situation where you've got two individuals. The work is probably somewhat similar. They're doing it in different ways, but you get to sit at the hub and sort of see like, this seems really good. This seems mediocre. Like I could bring some of this over and probably make your life easier, but it also takes, I think, some willingness to maybe admit that like, I'm doing this the way that I've been doing it. And it may not be the best way, but it's the way that I know. And it like, if that advisor is not willing to sort of reflect on that and be willing to change, which I mean, I think, right, we all hate change, that can be challenging too. And so I think that you have this really like unique opportunity because you're seeing multiple practices and actually doing the work. Even if like advisor A wants it done a certain way, this other way might actually be better and easier. And you have the opportunity to kind of bring that up and make their practice better for it. Have you found that have you experienced that? Has that happened to you at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the great thing about the two advisors that I got lucky enough to work with, going back to my red, yellow, and green prospect list, these two advisors were definitely green, but I thought that I would be a red for them because I had never used Quivr. I've used Salesforce, but I'd never used Quivr. So I kind of wrote it off as they probably don't want someone jumping into a whole new system that they haven't learned. But yes, to answer the question, the great thing about these two advisors is that they are in touch with each other. They speak to each other regularly. They know each other well. And so I have been given permission from each of them to share processes and workflows and what they're doing. So I can take something that one of my advisors is doing and take it to the other advisor and say, hey, would you want to implement this into your process instead? And actually just had a conversation yesterday with one of the advisors. And I said, hey, so-and-so is doing this. I know you don't do it, but would you want to? And I can tell you the situation is that so Quivr has the QCD tab in the tax planning module. And I'm not a Quivr power user yet, so I don't know if I'm going to use the wrong words, but like the QCD object within the tax planning module maybe is how I should phrase it. Perfect. One of the advisors created a donor advised fund object within the tax planning module to keep track of clients who are making charitable contributions for when tax time comes. The other advisor is using the planning progress module to keep track of those in one central location. And in having a conversation with the advisor that is using the planning progress, he prefers to use that versus the two separate objects to track it. And I think that is fine. It's whatever is going to make most sense and can be more consistently used for you and what you're doing. For me, it's a small challenge, but that comes with the nature of what I'm doing working with two advisors is I have two separate workflows, which it's totally fine. But it is really unique to be able to share between advisors what they're doing and how they're doing it. And do you want to explore that? And another example is Opero. So one of the advisors that I support is a heavy Opero user. The other advisor had never heard of it, saw a demo of it or a deliverable it created. And now we're kind of exploring what it looks like to use Opero to create our own tax letter, taking information that is housed in Quivr, similar to the Holistoplan tax letter, but the Holistoplan tax letter is very manual entry in some stacks. And so if we can use Opero to pull the information that's already in Quivr to create our own version of a tax letter, then that's kind of a unique feature of just Quivr in general plus the Opero
Yeah.
combination.
So for those of you that aren't familiar with what Opero is, Quivr is, I mean, our objective with Quivr is to be the hub for all data, right? Have everything in there. And then a common next step after your data is inside of Quivr is how can we use this data to create client facing documents? So very common things for that are, the quote unquote deliverables, the tax letter, the QCD letter, beneficiary review, estate plan summary, etc. And then another kind of category is more so of common documents that you need executed by the client. So IPSs, I know one of your users has their entire IPS in the system. So if they get audited, they push a button and they see all of their client, suitability information. They can also push a button and get their IPS generated so that they can just print it and have it signed or get it routed for signature. So Opero is a very reasonably cost piece of software. It might be $20 a month, if that. And then with that in exchange, right, you get an endless amount of documentation that you can derive directly from the data already in your system, which then saves you time and decreases your likelihood of making mistakes. So it's awesome. There's alternate solutions as well. Cloud files, Opero, there's 100 of them. So I love this. So you've been empowered to bring information from one user to the other, which is amazing. Not all advisors are open to that line of communication, which has its pros, but many more cons, in my opinion. What do you think the coolest thing is that you've been able to maybe bring to one advisor or seen one advisor do within Quivr or just the practice in general?
I think just the practice in general, and this is kind of a broad comment, but it speaks to attentive the attentiveness of your team and your willingness to look at our feedback and our suggestions and implement them. I will say that being a new Quivr user, 12 months in, almost 12 months in, that if I bring up to one of the advisors, I wonder if we can do this. The answer is yeah, probably. And that is just as simple as, of course, now I can't think of anything, but like example was when you are doing an insurance policy review, if you're looking at auto policies or umbrella policies, homeowners insurance, most auto policies are on a 6-month period, right? So your statement is a 6-month period, but in Quivr, you have an annual premium. So you annualize that out. That's fine. But when you're doing an insurance review, I thought it would be handy to know front and center, what is the date of the last statement that we have on file? And I told that to one of the advisors that, it'd be really handy if when I'm looking at what's already created and I need to update it, that's the next statement I need? What's the last statement that we had on file and do we need a new one? 2 minutes later, there was it's like statement date or whatever field in the insurance module. Okay, well, anything you want to do, anything you want to add can be added. I don't know how to add it yet, but I know I had a question a few months ago during one of the office hours. You helped me how to figure out a syncing issue between Calendly, Zapier, and Quivr and creating certain information in certain places. And it's anything that you want. If you just ask about it, it can probably be done.
That's the beauty of Salesforce. I mean, Quivr, it's impossible to have a piece of software that we want to deliver to the masses and make it perfect for everybody. You just can't. You
Yeah.
can't do it. You can't do it because if we give everybody every single field they'd ever want, then most people are going to have so many fields that they don't want that they get overwhelmed by it. So what we strive to do is give you maybe the 85% of the fields that we think everybody's going to need. But we have ways in the back end to, like you mentioned, very easily. And the 2 minutes wasn't an exaggeration. I'm sure that field was created within 2 minutes, probably closer to 45 seconds. And if you wouldn't have known how to do it, right? If you didn't know how to do it, or if the advisors didn't know how to do it, go to the community, come to office hours, and we'll help you with that because we will. I think you said it really, really well. One of the biggest advantages of Quivr is we're opening up Salesforce to a market that doesn't want to be software developers. So if you know what you want the end result to be, usually accomplishing those things are quite simple. The common theme, right, is you need to know what you want, right? Just like the advisors when it comes to training. If you know what you want, then Quivr can be the Swiss Army knife to help you get that. But that's cool. That's really cool feedback. Will, do you have anything else we should ask Marie today?
No, I really appreciate her being willing to share. And I do think it's kind of a fascinating situation because you do get to sit between some great advisors who are doing good work for clients. And like, that's, I think, what we all ultimately wanted out of our practices, right? To have good clients, enjoy the work that you do it on kind of your terms, which It sounds like you're doing exactly that right now. No, I think it's fantastic, and being willing to share that with others, I think is really special.
I agree. Marie, anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, just a huge mass amount of appreciation for the 2 advisors that I work for. They took a chance on me. We've pivoted, we've adjusted schedules. They've been great. So just a shout out of appreciation for them. Absolutely. For you guys, I sit in on office hours and I'll just listen every once in a while to kind of soak it in and hear what people are asking and see what I can take back to these advisors. So just the wealth of information that you guys take your precious time to share with people is super valuable. And if people are listening and haven't been to office hours yet, it's amazing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. This is usually where I would say if you need help, call Marie, but she's at capacity. So at this point, Marie, it's actually on you. If and when you decide to expand the team, we could probably get that person filled up in a week as well.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, thank you so much for joining us. Users of Quivr, I hope you got some good takeaways from this. Common themes, of course, is figure out where you want to go and then empower your team to help you get there. If you're not a user of Quivr, that's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody is perfect, right? But in all seriousness, if you are not a user of Quivr and you are struggling with maybe bringing on that first employee or bringing on that second advisory team, or you're having scaling issues, these are things that we are very, very, very well versed in. We understand what you're doing. We have actually been the person who has struggled with that, right? And Quivr is built very intentionally to help you overcome those problems like Marie just mentioned today. But awesome. Well, great. Thank you both very much. Until next time.
Thanks, guys.